Hey there everybody, Lady Silver Vixen here, and I thought I'd do a little bit about pagan history. Um, in the ancient world, religious persecution was rare prior to the rise of Christianity, and when persecutions occurred, they were limited in their scope and duration. When Christians attained state power during the reign of Constantine, persecution became the rule, rather than the exception. Persecution of all religions other than Christianity, as well as intense persecution within Christianity itself, became a permanent feature everywhere that Christians were in power. Um, the word pagan was actually first used to refer to the followers of all the hundreds of non-Christian religions of the Roman Empire during the historical period known as the Late Antiquity, approximately about 200 AD to 600 AD, somewhere in there. Um, the origins of the word pagan are uncertain. It is also not certain whether the people designated as pagans actually used the term to refer to themselves, or if it was used only by Christians. During late antiquity, the term Helena was widely used by non-Christians to refer to those who followed the spiritual traditions that long predated Christianity. This use of the term Helena is synonymous with the more widely used and understood term pagan. Um, there is no doubt as to who the historical pagans were, let alone whether or not they or their religions existed. According to the eminent historian Ramsay MacMullen, or Macmullen, author of the book Paganism in the Roman Empire, pagans were all the followers of the many hundreds of the empire's religions, save one. The American Historical Society called MacMullen the greatest historian of the Roman Empire alive today, at their annual meeting in 2001, at which MacMullen received the award of scholarly distinction. Pagans became the target of intense and sustained religious persecution, beginning with the reign of Constantine in the 4th century. Um, this is not a wild accusation cooked up by the enemies of Christianity. It is a well-documented, uncontroversial historical fact. Um, these persecuted pagans included the non-Christians of North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. They were often called the Oikumene, or the known world. I'm sorry if I butchered that word. I'm not really good at specific words. Um, Pagan religion and culture were thriving in the 4th century and continued a vibrant existence for centuries after the beginning of the persecutions. Even by the mid-6th century, uh, there were still first-hand reports of whole networks of pagan temples continuing to operate openly in Anatolia, the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. And when the new religion of Islam arose in the 7th century, the inhabitants of the Arabian Peninsula were still practicing some kind of pagan polytheistic religion, and the ancient faith of Zoroastrianism continued to be the religion of Persia up until the Islamic conquest of Persia in the mid-7th century. Even further east lay modern-day Afghanistan, where Buddhism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and even Hellenic paganism had been practiced prior to the imposition of Islam at the beginning of the 8th century. And without Western, Northern, and Eastern Europe, many peoples continued to be pagan for centuries to come. There were still Christian missions targeting the Siami people in Scandinavia in the 18th century. Let's try not to get too ahead, though. A brief reign of the pagan emperor Julian, who ruled from 361 to 363, provides clear evidence of the reality of clandestine paganism. Julian was born into a Christian household, and he was under constant guard on orders of his Christian cousin, the Emperor Constantius. Um, no one can say for sure when and where Julian converted to paganism. Julian himself states in his letters that he had been a pagan in secret for many years prior to becoming emperor. Before his ascension to the imperial throne, Julian could not openly declare his paganism without taking his life in his hands, Libanius, a famous pagan scholar who lived during Julian's reign, reported in his essay For the Temples that by the late 4th century after Julian's death, some pagans were not only pretending to be Christians, but were actually continuing to pray to their old gods while attending Christian religious services. So as we can see here, from what I've been saying so far, that paganism has actually been around for centuries. We all know this. Although modern day paganism is modified, um, there are basic roots and basic things that we still do adhere to. The main things that we do not any longer adhere to would be the sacrificing of animals or the sacrificing of humans, which is actually against the law. It is indisputable that pagans had already begun to practice their religions in secret in the mid and late 4th century. This is to no surprise for anyone familiar with other well-known cases of mass forced conversions. For an example, the forced conversions of Jews in Spain in the late 15th century, or the persecution of Christians in Japan in the 16th century. The Christians themselves were never in any doubt to the reality of clandestine paganism in their midst. When they had no other choice, pagans continued to practice religions in secrecy. But whenever and wherever possible, paganism continued to be practiced openly. As alluded to in the thing that I was mentioning about earlier, where the pagans were persecuted, and it included the North African, the Middle East, and Europe. So, in the 6th century, hundreds of years after Julian's reign, a Christian missionary in a region of Anatolia, in the very heart of the Roman Eastern Empire, reported of the existence of over 1,500 pagan places of worship that formed a well-organized network with one centrally located head temple. The historical period immediately following late antiquity is most commonly known as the Dark Ages. It lasted from about 600 AD to about 1000 AD. The Dark Ages are also now called the Early Middle Ages. The traditional dating of European history has the Middle Ages continuing until the Renaissance, which began sometime in the 14th or 15th centuries. Now, some of you might be asking what happened to the North Africa and the Middle East type thing here. These regions were actually central to the classical civilizations, now commonly referred to vaguely as Greece and Rome. Greece, in this historical context, actually refers to a vast swath of land that lies mostly in Africa and Asia, stretching as far east as the bank of the Indus River. The cultural and economic center of gravity of this Greece was in fact the great city of Alexandria in Egypt, and Rome came to include most of Greece, although it never actually extended as far east. And all of what it now thought of as North Africa, as well as most of Europe, all of Rome, including North Africa and the Middle East, became forcibly Christianized during late antiquity, but most of the non-European parts of Rome eventually fell to Islam. If anything, Islam was even more harsh in its repression of paganism than Christianity. While much of the Roman East persisted as the Byzantine Empire, it too fell to the Islamic Ottoman Empire by the 15th century. Now, the question is, just how long could pagans have possibly held out under such circumstances? There is no question that they did hold out for at least a little while, but they eventually had to succumb to the brutal, relentless repression of other religions. Amazingly, the Byzantine cleric Plethon left behind proof that he was a member, probably the leader, of a group of Chalcedonian followers of paganism. His secret writings, discovered after his death, begin with the declaration the gods really do exist. Plethon was born in 1355 and died in